Hi folks, welcome to Retro Power Uncut for another week, and we're going to start this week in the body prep area, which is an unusual turn of proceedings, but we're going to start with the Chevette estate, which as you can see has just finished its spell in the paint booth now, and the guys were just attaching the panels this morning, getting the door pins in and getting the bonnet and boot refitted so that they could proceed with the flatting and polishing of the rest of the body shell. The bonnet and boot and doors were all flatted a couple of days, I lose track of time, but a couple of days ago. They've already been flatted and polished, and then the proceeding with the rest of the shell is occurring. The clear coat that we've used, I'm just sort of thinking through what to touch on here. The clear coat that we use on pretty much everything is Max Mayer 320. I've forgotten the blooming thing now, but it's the 320 high solids clear coat. And it's very quickly ready to polish. It's a beauty of it compared to clear coats that we've used before is it's very rapid hardening. The extended cure on it is quite short, so that we can get on to polishing it quite quickly, as you can see here, because this was painted. Was this shell yesterday, wasn't it? Yeah. So the actual body shell was cleared yesterday. So it's very rapid. Normally we would leave a clear for longer than that to long harden, because we bake quite low. We bake at a fairly low temperature in our oven, and then just usually allow the lacquer to sort of post cure for a while before we flat it. But this is actually really rapid hardening and flats really quickly, very nicely. So the guys are getting on with that, getting that done. As I say, panels are already done, and then that's pretty much ready to rock and roll. That's kind of the end of our remit on this one. It was just, as I say, we've mentioned on previous episodes, but this had some metalwork done here, or a fairly extensive amount of metalwork done here some years ago, around 7 years ago, if I remember correctly. And then it had sort of been put on a back burner by the owner. The owner has changed jobs a couple of times and had quite a frenetic life work-wise, in that he travels around a lot with motorsport, with a motorsport team, and so life's got in the way of getting the car built. But he's managed to get the time and money sort of all in one place at the same time to be able to get this finished and painted, so he can actually crack on and get it back on the road, which is what he's been looking forward to doing for quite a while. So yeah, it'd be a nice car. And then in the background, awaiting its pinstripe application, is the second Mark 1 Escort project, which won't really have changed since last week, but we didn't even really mention it last week because nothing significant had moved on. The guys have got all the clear flatted down on that, ready for the pinstripe application and final clear, but we are still awaiting a final decision on the colour for the stripe, and there's quite a lot of toing and froing and decision making going on the colour of the stripe. There's a little bit of backwards and forwards. The customer being overseas does slow that process down a little bit, so that's why things are not moving forward very quickly on this. There's a lot of waiting for decisions, so that's what's happening there. In the background, however, and Carl may have mentioned it, may not, because obviously the car wasn't present, there's a lot of work going on in terms of getting the parts ready for assembly on this, and the process of getting this rolling once the paintwork is finished, once the stripes are done, should be extremely rapid. We have all the suspension ready to bolt in, most of the parts ready to go, so it should be a pretty rapid process once the body shell is actually in its final clear coat. So that's where we're at in terms of our body prep area and the situation there. So we're going to wander out here. I'm going to try and make Jamie's life as easy as I can. It's a little bit challenging, negotiating steps and things. A very narrow, dark corridor that goes between. It isn't featured in videos very often. We didn't really paint any of this when we did the refit, just because why, it's time and money. But this is the paint booth and body prep. Obviously, walking through there, it's not a normal route that we'd be going. Aha! Our paint and prep chaps. Gary and Steve are heading back in to carry on polishing. They'd run away while we did a bit of filming in there for a bit. Onto the Churchill Mark II Jag Coupe. Tom's gone off to get a brew, I think, because I'd said could he tone down the filing for a bit while we did the video, because he's pretty much been leading and filing lead non-stop. Now, can't remember where we were at in terms of lead last week, We're certainly working on the rear of the car, that I am aware of, but we ran low on sticks of lead, and our supplier ran low on sticks of lead. Now, we, for obvious reasons, gather up all the lead that we file off, and then we have a big bucket of lead which is enormously heavy. Of all the lead that we've filed off, and also lead that we've melted out of previous body shells when we've stripped them down. Obviously we melt the lead out before we do the metal work, and again, it's not a good thing to just leave lying around on the floor for obvious reasons, so we gather it all up and keep it in a bucket. At best it's scrap, but, sorry, at worst it's scrap, but actually it's also a source of lead that can be remelted for sticks. So what we've actually done is we have remelted some of that lead and recast it. We've got a little ingot mould that we've knocked up a while ago, and we've recast some lead sticks in that so that we can carry on working. Obviously, we're pretty careful with the safety front on that. You know, wearing decent metal vapor protection mask, and actually doing the casting work. That was largely done outside so that we weren't putting any lead vapors in the building. But we've cast some more lead sticks so we could crack on there. We've actually now just received the next shipment from our supplier as well. But one of the problems, I think I did mention this last week actually, one of the issues we had with the recast lead sticks is that the crystallisation of the lead when you recast it seems to have a pronounced effect on how the lead behaves when you're actually trying to apply it. And if we cool it too rapidly, I don't fully understand the lead metallurgy, but if you cool it too quickly, basically it makes it extremely difficult to work with as a material for body soldering. However, if you cool it extremely slowly and anneal it, it makes it much easier. It gives it a much more sort of buttery consistency when we go to apply it. So we've just improvised a bit of a slow cooling setup for cooling the lead sticks down nice and slowly, a fire blanket basically, and a refractory line box, and we've just cooled it down nice and slowly. The refractory line box we have for doing for braise, it's like a little brazing hearth, so nothing too exciting there, but it basically meant we could just cool the lead down nice and slowly. So that's meant that Stu and Tom could crack on again. Tom's largely been working on the offside rear quarter, which is what he's filing at the moment. Stu's been picking up some other jobs on the car as well, which was the radiator bottom hose. We've got a bit of a plumbing challenge there in that the original setup on the AJ16 engine. This engine is AJ16. It's removed from an XJS, a late facelift XJS Jaguar. Very similar, same engine, very similar ancillaries wise, but not the same ancillaries wise to the X300 4-litre normally aspirated AJ16. The lower plumbing is very slightly different. The plumbing between the two cars is slightly different, and I've actually managed to source a brand new aftermarket, relatively reasonably priced lower hose as a trial for the bottom hose on this. However, it's some way away from being a proper fit. So Stu's then been chopping things around and working out how to get things to fit, and has sort of mackled up a lower hose from parts so that we can work out the exact path and the best route for the pipe work to get the radii in place and make it all neat, which it isn't at the moment. Hasten to add, that isn't final plumbing. Now we've worked out the path of everything, got all the pipe lengths sorted, worked out what all the transitions need to be and how it's all going to fit, and what is and isn't reasonable, then we will fabricate the bulk of that in aluminium. That's been the decision we've made this morning, is that the bulk of the lower hose will be fabricated in aluminium, so that we can get the branches off in the right places, because the branches on the rubber aftermarket hose are just too far apart. Basically, the engine bay width on an XJS is a lot wider than the Mark II Jag, stating the obvious, and it means that the pipe branches could be further apart. We need them much closer together. Rather than adding multiple joins into the hoses, we're just going to fabricate all that in aluminium, so that we've got a rubber connector where it joins the radiator, rubber connector where it joins the back of the water pump, and then some spigots welded on to the aluminium pipe that goes between those rubber connections to connect to the inlet manifold and the heater return for the car heater, and also the water connection that goes to the antifreeze on the throttle body. And that'll get all those connections in place. Obviously the top hose is dead simple. Again, that's just a piece of this sort of hose bodged in. That's just a straight hose. That's very simple. But yeah, we've got a plan there now. It's just going to be some more aluminium fabrication involved. And then also Stu's been working on getting the washer bottle positioning. He's in fact conveniently positioned here. He has a little print off of the dimensions of the tank that we're using, that we will be using. And we've done a 3D print, a little CAD model and a 3D print of this tank so that Stu could work out the positioning. And I don't know if it's actually fitted in the car or not at the moment. I don't think it is, but Stu's been working on getting that fitted, because we're going to be putting that washer tank in one side and a radiator header tank in the other side. I can't actually remember which one is going which side, but they're basically both going in under the inner wings in there. The radiator header tank is going to be a siphon type, like a lot of Japanese cars use, where there is no expansion space, air expansion space in the radiator, and the fluid expansion expels coolant from the pressure cap to a siphon bottle, and then as it cools back down, it draws that fluid, the coolant, back from the siphon bottle back into the radiator. So you run a zero airspace system, and your expansion space is made up by pushing coolant out into a remote bottle. So that's the setup we're actually going for on this, just to try and keep the engine bay as clean and tidy as possible, and not run an airspace header tank in the engine bay. I mean, just to, interestingly, reading the comments on our videos, I understand that a lot of our viewership are people that actually have quite a lot of knowledge of vehicles. There are a few that don't, but I'm guessing a lot of our viewers have quite a lot of vehicle knowledge. But just for those that don't, to explain, just to give a bit of an explanation there to people who don't realise why a vehicle has a header tank, it's probably worth a little brief explanation. Is obviously you have a cooling system which is filled with a coolant, antifreeze and water, various types of antifreeze. It doesn't really matter what, but principally the main coolant is water. Water's very good at exchanging heat. It's got a very high specific heat capacity, and it's got and it will exchange it. You can heat it and cool it very readily. You know, so it's an ideal fluid as a coolant, other than the fact it's a bit corrosive and it does freeze. Antifreeze solves both of those other two problems. It's not corrosive, it can cause corrosion. That's you know what I mean. However, one of the properties of water that makes it harder to deal with is the fact that it expands and contracts quite markedly. I can't remember now what the coefficient of expansion is, but it's significant. So if you fill a cooling system completely with a water-based coolant and then you heat it up, it has to escape somewhere. It will generate pressure, and then it needs to escape somewhere. So if you fill it completely full with water, it will find an escape route from somewhere as it expands, and it'll find a weak point and burst out through it. So what you need to do is give that coolant some room to expand into. And what an awful lot of vehicles, most European vehicles, do is have a header tank or generate an airspace somewhere in the cooling system, so that airspace is filled with compressible air. The water expands, compresses the air in that space, and then when the water cools back down again and it contracts, then it comes back down and the air expands to fill the space left. And that works very well. As I said earlier, the alternative system to that is where you run a zero airspace system and allow the coolant to push out into a separate tank, but design that such that when the coolant then contracts again, it can just draw. It is then drawn back into the system. So that's the reason why we have a header tank. It's to allow the water to expand into a space, so it doesn't just burst something in the cooling system. So that's, yeah, a little bit of background on what we're doing there, and I think that's pretty much where we're at on that, without going into some sort of really minor details. Scott is working on the E30 Redux project. His time's actually been slightly divided. He's not actually done a huge number of hours on this week because he's been doing some other work in the background. You will see with Cal some dry sump tanks, and Scott's actually been doing some aluminium fabrication on those, and then the subsequent pressure testing and some other work on that, and then he's also been doing a couple of other little welding jobs for other people. So it's meant that he hasn't done a full week on this, but he has been working on the final fit up for the bumper. I think last week we mentioned about the revised bumper mounts that we were doing on the back of the car. He's finalised those, got them welded in place, used his little tool to weld those, made the spacers, fitted it all up, adjusted the thicknesses of the spacers, and got the rear bumper sitting absolutely crack on how it needs to sit. Really nice job, and that's all sitting really well. We're really very pleased, as one would hope. We're very pleased with the panel fit on this now. Everything's looking really good. So that's a good place to be. That's sort of where I'll finish on that. He's also had the, hence I'm lying on here, sorry, he's also had the door seals on, just checking what the door fits were like with the door seals in place. Onto the E-Type, and actually conveniently Sam's left me some bits here which will help me explain what Sam's up to. Sam is currently making the revised seat mountings for this. We had to do a little bit of a step backwards in that we had finalised the seating position. However, when we delved further into the detail of things on that, we've discovered that I think we concluded we finalised it a little bit too high. Now we're going to have the customer back to sit in the car again. He sat in the car before, however I think we had all kidded ourselves a little bit about the height being okay, and we've revised that a little bit and gone back through it and decided that with a tall person sitting in the car, it's actually too high, the seating position is too high, and that actually probably even with the customer sitting in the car, once it's outside on the road and not just sat in the workshop, we also think it's still too high. Tied into that is the aesthetic work, the rear body design work which is going on. And it was that refocused us on this, because looking at the proportions with a person, with a dummy person sat in the car at the height that we had the seat at before, the proportions just look wrong. An E-Type's such a thin car in terms of height that you have to absolutely minimise the profile of the person sticking out of it, the windscreen sticking out and everything else to make it look right. If things stick out of the top of the car too much, it looks totally out of proportion. So to that end, we're trying to revise, well, we are revising the seat mount down as physically far as we can possibly get that seat down. It means some slight compromises elsewhere, but we've worked around those, one of which is tight for exhaust space, but we've worked out a way of getting the exhaust through. So Sam's currently machining up some mounting bobbins for these. We're using these MX5 seat mountings. We're going to be using an MX5 based seat. It won't just be an MX5 seat thrown in, but MX5 as the seat as the basis of the seating. And so Sam's making these counterboard bosses which the seat mounts will bolt into. So I can hear the lathe going in the background. Sam's just machining those up. And then doing the revisions to the seat cross members, these cutouts and things to that, and then he's also revised the cutouts in the floor to just drop the seat down a little bit further. And the other part of what Sam's been working on is the gear shifter, which I think he'd started last week, which is the low car shifter for the 4L80E transmission in this. He's now got that mounted. He's finished the cutout in the top of the transmission tunnel, cut out the plates to mount that, got all that fabricated in, got the shifter in, and he's done quite a lot of fabrication to make room in the tunnel for the cable to get from the shifter to the transmission. We actually need a slightly longer cable now, just with the routing that has been necessary around the seat mounts. It's just very tight for space. And with the routing that is necessary to get that cable around the seat mounts, it's meant that we actually need a slightly longer cable. Someone was querying that with me earlier today, and I explained to him there's really not a problem with going for a longer cable. It's you know, in the scheme of things, that's a pretty minor problem. So if we can solve all the others, then getting a new cable made is relatively simple. They're a Morse type control cable. There's nothing particularly clever about them, so easy enough to fix that. So I think that's pretty much where we're at on E-Type. And we'll wander around the corner to where Bobby's working. And Bobby is continuing with the front end of the Allegro, which I think we'd mentioned briefly last week. He's got the condenser mount all in place. Jamie will have some footage of that because I can't really move it now, but he's fabricated that. He's drawn that up on CAD, cut that on the CNC plasma from 2mm aluminium, put multiple folds in it. It's quite an intricate piece, and it's got a curved section on one end for the condenser to latch into, and then a screw that retains it. Got all that fabricated, done a really nice job of that. And he's then fabricated with some nice sort of lightning holes this centre section that's going to support the slam panels, take the bonnet latching load, and also carry the inner faces of the radiator and the condenser. And then he's just fabricated this top section, this aluminium sort of punched and swaged panel, which goes across the top, and then 4 of the swage holes on that double as retainers for, well, as clearance for a retaining plate which is underneath, which then carries the bushes that are going to mount the top of the radiator and the condenser. They're on rubber mounts at the top. They're on pins at the bottom, rubber mounts at the top. The rubber mounts at the top are screwed into this top panel, and that's where they'll be the bits you undo to remove them, and everything will come out sort of up this way between the slam panel and the engine once everything's back together. So yeah, done a really nice job of fabricating all of that. That's coming together really well. Another day or so should see that pretty much getting there. And that's pretty much where Robbie's been at on that. It's quite a delicate, intricate piece of fabrication. The other thing was he's also finished the mounting of the lower valance to the support tube that also carries the radiator and the condenser, and he's also cut out and made clearance in the inner sort of valance, original inner valance support panel. He's created some space in there so that we can then put the duct work, well, it's not really a duct, it's not really duct work, it is a duct that is built into the back of the grills on this, or will be built into the back of the grills on this. It's created space for a duct that goes on the back of there, which will additionally feed air in sideways, in from there and in from there, from the pressure put onto the front of those panels by travelling through the air. That's then pushed in and it provides additional air to the front of the radiator and the front of the condenser where they're masked by this lower panel. We don't really want to fiddle too much with that. We kind of want to leave as much allegro as we can really around there, just so we're not detracting too much from the original style of the car, if you can call it that. We don't really want to, you know, it is fundamentally we're trying to keep some of the allegro about it, and that's, we don't really want to remove all of the panel work and make it look nothing like an allegro. So we're trying to use get cooling air in wherever we can without completely butchering all the front of the car. So that's what's going on there. And yeah, that, in terms of the fabrication, that's pretty much where we're at on that. And then moving on from that over here, I've been doing a bit of fiddling around with a little side task, which I thought we'll just touch on because it sort of has, there's an element of interest to it, which is that our long-term customer who owns the grey Chevette rally car, which we built a few years ago, who campaigns it in anger and has done for 4 years, I believe now. One of the little upgrades he's hoping to do before his next event is the wiper mechanism. The car has a more modern wiper motor fitted. I can't remember, it's either a Ford Transit or a Ford Mondeo wiper motor fitted. However, the original wiper arms are still retained by these parallel type splined bosses, and they're quite an awkward type of wiper arm to get hold of. These are originally fitted to the end of these wiper spindles. They're quite hard to get hold of, the type of wiper arm that goes onto those, and there's not a very wide range of choice available, and the ones that are don't have a particularly heavy spring in, they're not aerodynamic, they tend to lift off the screens at high speed. They're not really the things you want on a rally car. There's a whole number of ways you could tackle this problem, but in most cases with these things, if the original design was reasonably sound, which all of this system was, then it makes most sense to try and preserve as much of the original as possible. And to that end, we're going to keep the original spindle carriers, these nylon spindle holders that bolt into the body shell, but we're going to refabricate, we're going to keep these original actuation arms, but we're going to refabricate, well, remake the spindles so that they have a more modern type of spline on the end, so that we can fit a modern type of wiper arm, or relatively modern. And to that end, I've started making a set of stainless steel spindles to replace these spindles, which are tapered and splined. You have to excuse my knurling, it's not the world's best on a taper like this, it's quite hard to knurl a taper very neatly. But these spindles are going to be designed to take, they're actually designed to take a Mark II Escort wiper arm, which is obviously very prevalent, but a lot of modern wiper arms would fit on that. So there's a great choice of arms to fit, and then that will be threaded for a retaining nut. I actually broke my die this morning, which is why the job isn't finished. For some reason I only had one decent M8 by 1.25 die, and it split when I tried to adjust it. So I'm currently waiting for a new die. So that will need to be threaded, and then it'll have a circlet groove put in here. There's a little drawing of the part which Adam Maddens has actually drawn up for another project as well, because he's changing that. And then I did a little, just again going into details that probably bore most people, but we've got a little insert type grooving tool, and I've just got the diamond tool grinder out this morning and just tickled that to make a 1.2mm wide grooving tool so that we can put the grooves into the stainless. I've got some high-speed steel grooving tools, but on stainless it's nice to run a carbide one. It just guarantees a clean cut and a nice job on stainless steel. So I've just made a little 1.2mm wide grooving tool. Adam's drawn the grooves at 1.1mm. We'll groove them at 1.2 so that you've got a little bit of ability to get the clip in. You're not fighting the groove to get the clip in. As long as the loaded side of the groove is in the right place, having a slight bit of extra width on the groove just helps with installation of the spring clip that's going to retain those. So yeah, I'm basically waiting on Monday for a replacement die nut so that I can actually cut the threads, and also the spring clips. And also the other side of this is also the welding rods. I've run out of 312 stainless rod. If we're doing a job like this, I would tend to use what's called a 312 type stainless steel rod, which is people would refer to them as a dissimilar metal rod. I'm going to be welding a stainless steel, which is a 303 stainless, into a mild steel wiper rocker arm. That'll be puddle welded into there, and it's generally best to use a high strength welding rod, and the 312 welding rod will guarantee that the stainless doesn't try and crack out of the back of the mild steel, which is possible. It shouldn't do, but there's a possibility, and the 312 rod just gives you a bit of safety margin when joining a stainless steel to a mild steel, that you don't suffer any cracking. On something like a wiper spindle where there's a fair amount of stress on it, it's generally best. If that was a lightly stressed component, it wouldn't really matter, but there's obviously a fair amount of torsional stress on that when it's working, so we don't want it cracking and his wiper blades coming off. So we're going to use a 312 rod on that. As I say, I'd run out, so just waiting for some more 312 rod. And that's pretty much where we're at, I think, for this side. There's lots of other things going on in the little detail things going on in the background. I'm fighting a bit of a battle with our plasma cutter at the moment, just trying to get work on the post processor to try and get our torch height compensation working properly. For some reason, it's never worked properly, and I'd like to get it working properly. So if anybody knows anything about getting digital torch height control working properly on Mac 3 software, feel free to message me. And at that point, talking of messaging, a couple of questions and answers as well. So yes, some questions. I noticed there were lots and lots of questions. I'm going to address a few of them, not all of them, but I'll address a few of them. First one I saw was, how is my autograss car coming along? Steadily. Progress is being made. Chassis is pretty much there. I'm having to bear with the fact that it is not the only project being undertaken by the chap that's doing it. The chap that's doing it is called Reese Jackson, and his company is Total Fabrication Solutions, and he is making a lovely job of it. I'm just sort of, I'm itching to get it done now though, so I keep chasing him and being impatient. But he is making a very nice job of it, and it is progressing well, and I need to get up there pretty imminently for a trial sitting to finalise seat mounts and various other things and control positions and stuff. So yeah, that's progressing in the background. I'd love it to be in my hands now, but I'm going to have to be patient until next year, so early next year. So that's where that's at. Somebody had mentioned Allegro curb weights of these versus the Integra. And versus an original Allegro. Interestingly, we have had a little speculate, we don't know for certain. It's definitely going to be lighter than an Integra by some margin. We don't know exactly what margin. The Integra is, off the top of my head, somewhere around the 1100 kilogram mark. In all up, ready to go form with everything in, but I don't think that's with a full tank of fuel. But they're around 1100 kilos. I would estimate we're going to be somewhere in the region of 200 below that. I would estimate we're going to be in the 900 kilo region. I'll be optimistic and say 850. I don't think we'll hit that. I would say somewhere around the just under 900 kilos region. Any lighter than that, I'll take that as a bonus, but we'll see where we end up. And on the subject of weight, somebody mentioned about the weight distribution, and I think that question had been answered by another viewer actually. Somebody was saying that the engine looks a long way ahead of the axle line. It is a reasonably long way ahead of the axle axle line, but it's exactly where Honda put it. And given that the DC2 Integra is regarded as probably one of the best handling front-wheel drive cars of all time, I'm not about to move their engine for them. Basically, we're just using Honda as Honda intended, other than the very small wheelbase change that we made, which is to the rear of the front seats. All of the rest of the weight distribution and key mechanical components are exactly as Honda. So the engine's on the original Honda mountings, all of the suspension is on the original Honda mountings, all of the running gear is exactly as Honda left it. There is no changes to any of that. All of that is exactly bolted in exactly where Honda put it. So yes, the engine is a reasonable way ahead of the axle line. However, it is a very light engine. But yeah, that's where it was in the Honda, and that's where we're leaving it. And somebody had also, and we've had this question quite a bit, is we've actually covered it in a previous video, but I'll very briefly touch on it again. Why Allegro and Integra? Two things really. The first one being significant, the second one being more sort of more of just a crazy idea in my head really. The first part, the significant reasoning was mainly led by my brother. Which was that, you know, if we made the decision early on, we wanted to keep the car front-wheel drive. It was originally a front-wheel drive car. It was designed to be the new front-wheel drive well, no, it wasn't a hatchback, but the new front-wheel drive small family vehicle for British Leyland, for the Austin Group, and to that end, we wanted to keep it front-wheel drive, so keep the original principle of the vehicle. So if you're going to start with if you want to keep a front-wheel drive, you want to look back through a little bit of history and say, well, what is an iconic front-wheel drive car that's reasonably compatible in dimensions, that's widely regarded as very good, and the Integra DC2 was pretty high up on that list. The next thing was there's already a Honda British Leyland tie-up in history. The Allegro, I've mentioned this before in a video I think, but the Allegro was kind of a dead duck in terms of cars made by British Leyland, and they knew that, and they knew that the sales were failing on it terribly, and that it was really creating a major financial struggle for the company. And at that time, the thing that came to the rescue was Honda. With basically the Triumph Acclaim, which was the Honda Ballade of the time, and the joint venture between Honda and British Leyland resulted in the Triumph Acclaim. And the Triumph Acclaim was the front-wheel drive, modern in its day car, which actually picked up the sales that were being lost by the Allegro. So actually what we've effectively done is done that again. We've got the Allegro and put the Honda bits in it, and hopefully made it reliable. So that's kind of the other side to it. Partially it was just pure dimensions, and to lead on from where I started there, where Cal really had done the sort of, yes, the dimensions look reasonably compatible. To further that, Cal and George did some scan work on a standard Integra and standard Allegro, just to see whether the bulkhead area, which is the key to the car really, the bulkhead area, you know, are all the controls, the engine mountings, and the key suspension and all of the core structure around the area of the bulkhead, is that all compatible dimensionally between the two cars? And it was unbelievably compatible, far better than we ever thought. So that was what led us to continue with that potential route and turn it into a real route. So that was that. And finally, I noticed a comment about what has happened to the Jensen, and it had been incorrectly answered. So I thought I'll pick that one up because it's been incorrectly answered in the comments on YouTube. The Jensen is paused at the moment at customer's request. Because of a financial issue, not of the customer's doing. I noticed the comment, an answer had been made about the customer going bankrupt. That's not the case at all. The customer actually had one of his customers put him in a financial situation, not a bankruptcy, nothing of the sort, but a situation where he needed to pause progress on that car, and subsequently various other complications have come along, which means that the progress is paused for a little while. It will be picked up again. It hasn't been stopped permanently. It will be carried on with, don't worry. We're all as enthusiastic about that as the customer is enthusiastic about it, and I've no doubt you viewers are enthusiastic about it, but it will be carrying on. It's not permanently paused, and he certainly hasn't gone bankrupt. So to progress from there, I will hand over to Cal.
Thank you, Nat, and welcome to the second half of another episode. I thought I'd start in here because we've got these stacks of billet bits building up. I think it's safe to say the chips are flying, as they say, at Jonathan's place and Andy's place in terms of the amount of machine bits they're doing at the minute. Predominantly for the Mark 1 Escort projects. So I think at the minute we're doing interior door release handles, winders, window winders, the bezels for the door, pull straps. Wow, what else? We've got some other bits there as well. We've got parts being lined up for the centre console. The instrument binnacles are going to be in progress soon. And that leads me actually onto some stuff Luke's working on. So at the minute, he's working on the final iterations of the design for the cam covers we're going to do for the BD-G engines. The first of which is due here tomorrow. So fingers crossed, if the van doesn't break down, which it has a habit of doing, we will have the first of the 2 Sherwood-built BD-G engines here tomorrow. And then that will allow us to trial fit a prototype, a 3D printed prototype of our revised cam cover, which we're doing. Which we're doing for 2 reasons really. One is we want to do coil on plug, and we wanted to be able to hide the wiring to the coil packs away. So we wanted to do a sort of 2-piece cover so we could hide the wiring. And 2, just cosmetic reasons. We'd quite like to put our own stamp on it, just to sort of finish off the overall vision we've got for the engine bay. So yes, a lot going on. And then there's various bits here. I talked about these last week. Nat showed a fair amount of detail on the idea with these sump tanks last week, but they are now finished. All the fabricated bits done. They've been given just a Scotch-Brighted finish, and these are going away for anodising, along with the top pieces, which are here. So if you follow me, we'll go and have a look at what else is going on. Down here, actually, there's a row of wheels and tyres which are ready for the second of the 2 Escorts, Project Kuma. Hold the door for you. Which we are on the brink of getting in for build. We're actually just waiting on feedback on the pinstripe colours. It's literally ready to pinstripe now, but I've sent the colour samples to the owner. I'm just waiting for some feedback on that. Once we've nailed those colours, we'll be able to do the pinstripes, lacquer it all in, and then once we get the shell in here, we'll be very quickly able to get it to the stage this one's at. And speaking of this one, Anthony has been working on some further build work on this. So predominantly plumbing, brake plumbing and fuel plumbing is what he's been on with. Which will take shape pretty quickly because we'd already done all the planning work when it was at bare metal stage. So we'd put all the holes in the shell, all the provision in for where all the pipes were going to be routed, taken reference photos of where they were going to be routed. We'd done the mountings for the fuel pump and filter and all the clipping points for the fuel line. So at the moment it's essentially just making up the fuel lines, cutting them to length, checking all the movements of things like the flexes to the front wheels at different ride heights and steering angles to make sure everything clears there, and getting everything mocked up, and then they'll be crimped and pressure tested and put on the car. So yeah, we're basically plumbing stage, and then when the engine arrives tomorrow, we should be fairly quickly at the point we can get that in. So my plan is, I think we've probably got to just do a paint on the block. Then we'll be able to get a gearbox on because they're all ready to go, and then we should be very quickly at the point we can put the engine box in, then we can get the exhaust in, and that kind of opens up a lot of the remaining work on these. The other sort of big area of remaining work is just the interior. I say just like it's a 2-second job, but essentially the upholstery work. So that's that. Moving past here, actually I'll pause briefly because we've got here the 2 Vintage Air. So these are the Vintage Air Generation 4 heat and aircon units we're using in the Escorts, and they're laid out here because we used one of these for all the mock-up work during dry build, and there were some changes made to it, so we're just making the other one match. We rotated the expansion valve by probably sort of 180 degrees to point it the other way. We made these little flanges where we put the air sort of connection for the incoming air from the scuttle area. Generally these units are just designed to kind of recirculate the air in the car. They just sit under the dash, but almost always when we install them, we actually put a flange on here and mate it up to an incoming fresh air source. So we're doing that. And then I think we've just got to design a replacement piece. This one's removed, a replacement piece for this, so we've got the air going in a direction that's more convenient on that car. That's why they're laid out there conveniently. And then E-type. So actually I think it was probably only last week or the week before that somebody asked about when they were going to see some progress on this. Now we had to have a bit of a pause on this project, and as it stands we're only going to be able to trickle along a little bit with it. But it is nice to be getting back on with it. So we've been tackling a couple of areas, the coolant plumbing and the power steering plumbing. Coolant plumbing wise, a lot of it was already done. We needed to do the bottom hose, which James has just made this sort of aluminium 180-degree elbow to get that running neatly to the bottom hose. And then we wanted to do a neater job of the overflow expansion bleed. So essentially there's a connection here which then hooks up to that expansion tank at the top there. What we wanted to do, that's normally just a rubber hose, but we wanted to do a neater job of that. So you can see there's a very long hard line sitting up here. James has just been forming that hard line to do a really neat installation of that down the chassis up to here. He's just got to chop the ends on that now, and then there'll be just a short 90-degree elbow on that end and a short 90-degree elbow on this end here, and everything else will be hard line between. So it's just a neater job of doing it. And then the next bit will be the power steering reservoir. So there's still a decision up in the air at the minute on exactly how we're going to make, or whether we're going to use an off-the-shelf tank or whether we're going to make one. And we want it to kind of look in keeping and period. So we're just making a final decision on that. But then it's going to be running the power steering lines. So we've got to do the high pressure lines from the pump, which sits down there, to the rack, and then the return line back from the rack to the reservoir, and the feed from the reservoir to the pump itself. So we'll see a bit more of that next week, but it's just nice to be back on with this thing. The Land Cruiser. So our Viton lined fuel filler hose arrived. The company which I couldn't remember last time, and then I said it was going to be subtitled and it wasn't, was Goodflex. So thank you very much to Goodflex, who've made up the fuel filler line for it. I think, I'm just trying to see whether he's actually done it yet or not. So Adam was in the process of, and I think has done, fitting that fuel filler, and then it's Thursday now, we're going to leave this over the weekend with it completely brimmed with fuel and the window shut, just to give it the test to see whether it actually works and whether we eradicate that fuel vapour smell we were getting. But fingers crossed that'll be all right. And then in other news on this, I've taken it out for another little run, just a short run, because we'd rebled the brakes. We'd found a little problem with the rear pads as well. There's like a, if you're familiar with this type of caliper, there's two little scalloped out bits in the pistons, and then there's two lugs in the pad that kind of engage with the gaps in the piston, and we'd noticed they weren't quite engaged, which would have been causing the pads to flex a lot under braking. So I had complained that the pedal travel was very long on it. So we did a rebleed and spotted and resolved that problem. So I just wanted to make sure that they were feeling better, which they are. I'm happy to report. In fact, in the little trundle down the road I did, I thought everything was performing extremely well on it. So I think if the fuel smell's resolved, we'll be able to button all that up, get the seats back in, get the seat belts in, and I think that's it. So I reckon we're probably a couple of weeks away from handover. And on the subject of handover, you will notice the Morris is not here. And the Morris is not here, not because it's been handed over, but it has gone to our detailing guy. I don't know why I'm going over here to show you the gap. Look, there's not a car here. But it's gone to Detail by Dale, who is now in the process of basically doing all the final machine polishing, ceramic coating, engine bay, interior, basically sprucing it up to a level which we'd struggle to do in the environment that we've got. I hope one day, maybe in another premises, we might be able to have our own detailing bay, but as it is, we haven't really got a suitable environment for it. So he's doing that. We took it down there with the rear wings removed. You probably remember that I'd mentioned last week that we'd picked up a couple of stone chips on it during testing, despite my best efforts to encase it in masking tape. We also got one on the front wing, so we took off one front wing, both rears, repainted those, but we've left the rears off because we're going to do a sprayable PPF on those. I was kind of umming and ahhing on which route to go, and I had somebody say they could do normal, film type PPF on the rear wings, but a couple of my usual detail and a couple of others said it would be the angles would be too great, and I was very concerned about a lot of stretching and moving and trying, and the possibility of damaging the paint. So we've decided to go with a sprayable PPF, which we're going to do, and then we'll get the wings back on when it's back here, and then it will be ready to go. So I think also it's probably going to be a couple of weeks and that'll be going as well. So that's pretty much where we're at for this week. I'm bound to have forgotten something. I'm going to look at Jamie and see Stratos. Yes, I know. You know, this is why there's no visual reference. It's just outside the door. It's the other side of the shutter. So yes, the Stratos. I'm trying to think. Last week we were at the stage we'd sorted the aircon, and we were basically just about to embark on the final mapping work on it. We were getting all the interior back in, got the seats back in. We refitted the rear, the window that fits behind you. I wasn't happy with how the seal was done on that the first time, so we redid that and neatened up the seal. I'm trying to think whether there was anything else. Oh, the guys had the clam components next door because we were repairing some damage on the rear clam. And buffing out some defects on the silver on the louver panels, and the front one I decided needed repainting. I think we basically had some bubbling gassing in the fiberglass which had happened after it had been painted, so I wanted to strip that and repaint it, so I think they're just finishing that off. Alex has then been working on some continuation of the mapping work, so we'd kind of got it. We did quite a long while ago, we did some track testing in it. Obviously it was IVA tested, so we were sort of happy it ran generally fine and was good on emissions. But there were some situations where we weren't happy. Sometimes when it returned to idle it had cut out, and the cold start wasn't perfect on it, and the idle control was a little bit erratic, particularly from cold. Now it's fly-by-wire throttle, and it's been quite a challenging one in terms of the mapping for that. It's got a 100mm throttle body on it, fly-by-wire, and it's supercharged with that Eaton supercharger, which has got a vacuum operated bypass on it. And the combination of all of those things does make it quite hard to control the idle, because a tiny amount of movement in the throttle butterfly makes quite a big difference. And then if you open it like any significant amount, the supercharger bypass shuts, but then adds another change in parameter into the deal. So it's quite a difficult one to get a handle on, but Alex seems to have pretty much got on top of it now. So I mean, he's just been out for he's been doing a lot of stuff in the workshop, just idle and sort of tweaking that. He's been out for a drive in it today and was happy with the results of that. I think really it's mainly the cold start that's remaining on that, and it's always difficult doing cold start mapping because you don't really get the opportunity to, you get a very small window. You know, the car's cold, you start it, you can log all of the parameters, all of the sort of sensor readings during that first cold start, but then of course it's warm at that point. So although you can look at what's happened and then decide what change you're going to make to try and improve it, you can't then sort of find the results of that change until the next time it's cold, which at best is twice in a day. but even to be honest, realistically, to get a properly stone cold start, it's really once a day. Just do it in the morning, log what you see, decide on some changes to make, put them on the ECU, wait till the next morning, start it up again, see if it's improved it. So it can be quite a long-winded process, but I reckon we're very close on that. And what I will mention is that due to a change of circumstances for the owner of that car, predominantly that he's not going to be in the country very much, he is going to be offering that car for sale. Now I think our intention is to take it to the NEC for the Classic Car Show in November, potentially have it on Johnny Smith's Late Break Show stand. However, if you or if you know of somebody who might be interested in buying that Stratos, I believe it's going to be up for grabs. So best way to get in touch is probably just to drop us an email to inquiries@retropower.co.uk if you're interested, and we can put you in touch with the owner. Further to that, stock up on winter warmers. You can get your hoodies and your beanies and your roundstone coffee in our shop on the website retropower.co.uk. And as always, I shall see you next week.